From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Thanks very much, Ollie. How you doing? Are you well? Have you had a good old Monday? You have. I've been fairly quiet today. Been a busy old afternoon, so I haven't been tweeting, but I am live. Looking forward to Monday's programme. It is the 12th of November 2018. Your Richie Allen Show.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Lovely. I'm really looking forward to welcoming back to the programme the one and only Nick Kollerstrom. It's been ages and ages since Nick was on. I first met Nick when he published his book, Terror on the Tube, which is the authoritative version of what happened on the 7th of July 2005. In fact, I shouldn't say the authoritative version. It is the definitive account of what really happened and not what you were told happened. Nick Kollerstrom has put his big old brain to work and he's been looking at the Skripal story. Sergei and Yulia, whom allegedly were poisoned by Novichok in Salisbury. Nick joins me in about 25 minutes time. We'll keep him on. It'll be an extended conversation. We might even delve into speaking about the 7th of July 2005, which has become known now as 7/7. He's the only guest. This is Monday's Richie Allen Show, live on Fab Radio 2, TuneIn Radio, triggerwarning.tv, and of course richieallen.co.uk. As usual, if you'd like to contribute something, if you'd like to have a go at me, if you'd like to call me a big baldy bastard, you can do so by tweeting, you big baldy Irish bastard, to @RichieAllenShow. There's only one baldy Irish bastard. That'd be me. Welcome. Marvellous. I'm a bit tired, to be honest, because you know when you do, when you learn the intricacies of radio production and presenting, one of the things you are told, never tell your listeners that you are tired. No, I had a bit of a heavy day. A friend of mine, Michael, came around. Michael Cohen, I've mentioned Michael before, came to watch the game with me yesterday. Oh, woe is me. And woe to every Manchester United supporter in this city today. Spanked most royally by the men in Sky Blue, the citizens, of course, running out 3-1 winners. I had a few drinks more than I would normally have. And I'm a little bit worse for the wear. I'm not. I'm in good form now. I was a bit knackered earlier, but now I'm in good form, I tells you. I'm all right now, but you should have seen me last week. The great Rodney Dangerfield. Hi to William, hi to Bass Ninja, to Bob Stew, and to Eddie. Right. Let's move on. Let's do our job, eh? Microchipping. Talked about this on Sunday View yesterday. Spoke about it at length because there was an article in the Sunday Telegraph about it. UK firms are going to roll out microchipping for their employees. They can't wait. I don't mean the employees, although some of them will presumably be very enthusiastic about it. Firms can't wait to do it. Well, the Trade Union Congress, or the Trades Union Congress, I should say, the TUC, ain't happy. They might be useful for something after all then. And the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, is also not happy. Now, the CBI represents 190,000 UK businesses. Is that right? Are there 190,000 businesses affiliated with the CBI? Well, anyway, they have voiced their concern, and a CBI spokesperson said, while technology is changing the way we work, this makes for distinctly uncomfortable reading. Firms should be concentrating on rather more immediate priorities and focusing on engaging their employees rather than microchipping them. Now, the Trades Union Congress, whose General Secretary is Frances O'Grady, she said today, we know workers are already concerned that some employers are using tech to control and micromanage, whittling away their staff's right to privacy. Microchipping would give bosses even more power and control over their workers. There are obvious risks involved, and employers must not brush them aside or pressure staff into being chipped. I tell you what, dear listener, I'm not joking when I say we really have arrived at that place that was predicted or was written about by the great dystopian novels of yesteryear and the great dystopian science fiction films of yesteryear. We're there now, when people are being microchipped by their companies. Now, I told you yesterday that Biohacks, which is a Swedish firm, is in talks with several UK companies to provide these microchips. And I mentioned a man yesterday called Johan Osterlund from Biohacks. He was mentioned also in several stories today. He was on Sky News, and the first thing he was asked to do by the presenter was explain the benefits of the old microchip there. This is what he said.
Well, sovereign identity, protection of your data and your personal integrity.
Sovereign identity, protection of your data, and personal integrity, he said there. Do you want to hear him say that again? What are the benefits?
Well, sovereign identity, protection of your data and your personal integrity.
Me. That's a nonsense, but he goes on.
And besides that, it's an awesome tool to handle all your digital interactions throughout the day, making them more secure and easier.
So who's using them at the moment, and why specifically?
Well, anyone above 18 that breathes. We have 65-year-old government officials all the way down to 18-year-old tech students.
So if a company comes to you and says, well, we want microchips for our staff, what is a company using them for? What's the difference between the traditional ID pass that you swipe to get in and out of the building, for example, and a microchip?
Convenience, for one. And two, technology has moved into the body, and it already begun, and it's not going to stop. So our main priority is making sure that it's made for the user and by the user, rather the other way around. I mean,
how interesting. It's already getting in the body and it's not going to stop, says Osterlund, the Swedish developer of this technology. He's not the inventor of it. He's rolling it out in Sweden. Amazing, isn't it? It's here, and that's just the way it is. Now, there are some listeners to this program who are very much interested in this issue, and they will tell me about smart dust. And they are right. Because while this thing that he has been developing in Sweden is about the size of a grain of rice, and it goes between your thumb and forefinger, that fleshy bit there, right? And that's the one he's hawking, basically. We are aware that technology exists, micro technology, nano, I should say, technology, and smart dust. This stuff can be made, if it's a grain of rice, I'm sure that there are other companies who are making these things maybe 1/1,000,000th the size of a grain of rice, and they can be ingested by breathing. And a lot of people believe that sort of stuff has been deployed, has been used without the consent of people in certain places. And I'm not immune to that, and I can understand people talking about that. But anyway, he's not great, this guy. She asks him about privacy, but overall she's fairly weak, the presenter.
I mean, I suppose there is a fear, isn't there, that this is a little bit Big Brother, really. And if I'm working for a company and they say to me, well, if you'd like to, you can have a microchip fitted and then all of your data is stored there. You can get in and out of the building. You can get access to the printers. You can get access to documents. I'm thinking to myself, well, what else can they have access to about me?
Well, the thing is, all the data is aggregated in your control. So you decide where the data goes, if it goes, when it goes, and to whom, and also what you get paid for it. So
this is nonsense now. He says all the aggregated data that will be on the chip inside your hand is under your control. You decide who gets it and who doesn't, he says. Presumably, she doesn't ask him because she's piss poor the presenter, she should ask him to explain that. And presumably, if she did say, well, how do you control your data? Presumably, he would say, well, there will be an app on a phone that only you can access through facial recognition or through fingerprint technology or whatever. And then you'll go on the phone, and the phone, of course, will be connected to the chip in your hand. And if you want to give somebody access to the data on the chip, you can. That's presumably what he means by it's going to be under your control. And you can sell it, he says. And in a minute he talks about finding people who steal it. This guy is batshit crazy. But he's dangerous as well. Have a listen.
So we're already, before the GDPR, we were protected by the PUL. So basically, personuppgiftslagen, which protected your personal data. Now the GDPR is like a big brother to that law. And besides just protecting you and giving you the right to kind of demand misuse of it, anyone misusing it now get a 20 million euro fine or 4 to 5% on net. So actually trying to take advantage of it would be kind of silly. What
a load of bullshit that is. Anybody misusing your data on the microchip in your hand can be fined 20 million euro. He's properly deluded. How would you ever know that your that your chip has been scanned? How would you ever know that? You know, are you trying to tell me that sophisticated hackers couldn't access what's on that chip? Let alone the fact that once you are microchipped, you are findable, you are identifiable. There isn't a place on planet Earth that you can go and be anonymous and be private, right? This guy's an idiot, and this is just the beginning. And I again bow to listeners to this program who will say that his little rice-sized, grain of rice-sized microchip is probably old technology now, that they've reduced this to nanoparticles. Listen, I'm not going to argue with you. Dreadful that the news media is not giving these guys more of a grilling, though, about the moral, about the ethical concerns about sticking microchips into people, you know. Anyway, let's move on. A little bit of Brexit talk in a minute. You've been warned. Not a lot, though. Before that, here's an interesting story I saw on RT. A judge in the US state of Illinois has ordered training on transgender issues to be given to all prison staff. That's in the entire state of Illinois. Why? Well, a trans woman is suing the state. The trans woman is incarcerated at a male prison and says that he has been raped. Now he's suing the state, or she, as he would prefer to be called. Here's RT with the story. This is interesting.
A US federal judge has ordered prison officials in Illinois to reconsider a transgender woman's denied request to be moved to a women's prison. It comes after the inmate took legal action against the state's correctional department, claiming that she's treated like a sex slave in men's facilities. 26-year-old Dion Strawberry Hampton is currently serving a 10-year sentence for burglary. She says she's faced sexual abuse in all 4 of the men's prisons she's been held in.
Stop breaking into other people's houses then, maybe. There's an idea. Stop breaking into other people's houses, you grubby little bastard, and then you won't have to worry about being in the wrong prison. Just a thought.
Hampton has had her previous request for transfer denied and argues that she would be safer in a women's prison. Her lawyer has praised the federal judge's intervention.
This is an important step, not only for Strawberry, but in general for transgender women imprisoned across the nation.
Well, the Department of Corrections, which is responsible for the supervision of inmates, says it makes every possible effort to safeguard vulnerable prisoners.
The Illinois Department of Corrections maintains a strict zero-tolerance policy towards all forms of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. The department carefully considers housing assignments and the unique needs of offenders who identify as transgender.
You know, from what I understand from years of researching for programs presented by other people and presented by myself, sexual abuse in prison is rampant. And when prisons say that they have a zero tolerance policy and they have a zero tolerance approach to sexual abuse in prisons. It's just a standard 2-liner or 3-liner. People get assaulted in prison. They get violently physically assaulted, and people get sexually assaulted. It's not unique to the trans person. Sadly, don't find it funny. And I've spoken to many prisoners over the years who've come out of prison and asked them about sexual violence in prisons. And not one ex-prisoner said to me, it doesn't really go on. It goes on. 2 trains of thought here on the trans prisoner. First of all, have a listen to Steve Malzberg. Steve's a journalist, and he doesn't have much sympathy for Strawberry.
Trump administration recently loosened and changed regulations that came down under the Obama administration. They say that if you're judged on what you are based on your biological sex. Okay, so this person that we're talking about in Chicago, in Illinois, would be judged a male under the Trump administration. And the reason it was changed is because female prisoners in Texas had a similar situation, and they sued. They didn't want a transgender male who said he was a woman coming to their prison. They said it was an invasion of their property, that you keep everybody safe, but you don't start making special accommodations.
Steve Malzberg said that the Trump administration is aware of the fact that female real women in other prisons have sued in the past when a man who identifies as a woman was sent into their midst. Now, we've covered this, of course, here in the UK, where a trans woman, a man who thinks that he is a woman, sexually assaulted female prisoners while he was on remand. We talked all about that. Karen White, I think, is the person involved. So he says that ultimately it's about protecting these women from being basically housed with a man. Whatever he thinks he is, he still has a penis. And then you have the other side of it. You have the progressive side. Have a listen to Anthony Rogers Wright. Anthony reckons we all need to be trained. All of us.
Gender dysphoria is accepted by the American Medical Association and American Psychological Association as distress from gender assignment at birth. So this isn't just something that people are doing for fun. This is a recognized medical condition based on science, based on research, and based on study. So it's very, very important that we train these prison facilities better, just like the entire society needs to be trained and more informed about the very specific issues that are affecting transgender people nationwide.
We all need to be trained. All of us need to be trained to think the right thing, to think what the establishment wants us to think. We have to be trained. Very Owen Jones-esque there, that little snowflake who writes for The Guardian. We all need to be re-educated to feel how they tell us to feel about these things. When 99 out of 100 people have no problems with a man who wants to identify as a woman, or a woman who wants to identify as a man. No problems whatsoever. Live and let live. You can't be told what to think. Of course, I'm happy to live next door to somebody who is a man who identifies as a woman. I have no problem with that. But they want you to think that he's really a woman when I don't think that. So we all have to be retrained. What I would say there, and I don't make light of sexual assaults in prison. I make no joke about it at all. The thieving little bastard should stop climbing out of people's upstairs bedroom windows with televisions and DVD players under his arm. Then you wouldn't have to worry about what prison you're going to. I would have said, Yeah. You're getting more and more right-wing, Richie, some people would say. I'm not. I like to think that on these issues I just imply a little bit of common sense. 21 minutes past the hour. Ministers have been told that Judgment Day is coming over Brexit as the UK and EU strive for a deal within 48 hours. They want to hammer out this agreement on the terms of the UK's exit by Wednesday, that's 2 days from now, so that EU leaders can agree it by the end of November. This is such a ridiculous mess now. There aren't words really to describe it. Tory MPs will not support Theresa May's plan. Her colleagues on the Remain side of the fence won't support it. The Brexiteers won't support it. Labour won't support it. The half a dozen Lib Dems won't support it. It's dead as a dodo, right? Right. Now, Keir Starmer, who's a Labour MP, but he's also the shadow Brexit secretary. He was on Sky News this morning and he said that Brexit can be stopped, contradicting what Jeremy Corbyn told a German magazine over the weekend. Corbyn had told Der Spiegel that Brexit cannot be stopped, but Keir Starmer says it can. Here he is with the Sky News presenter Sarah Jane Mee, Starmer first saying that if Theresa May fails to get her deal, and she will fail, they, the Labour Party, will call for a general election.
If the deal goes down, then we'll call for a general election to say the government ought to go. If that doesn't happen, then all options must remain on the table, and that includes the option of a public vote. So it's look at the deal.
Stop Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn was wrong in that instance. You can stop Brexit.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn, as I say, Emily, the whole of the Labour Party signed up to our policy position. That hasn't changed. Nothing Jeremy has said has changed.
So he was wrong there when he said he can't stop
Brexit.
Labour can stop Brexit.
Well, Brexit can be stopped, but the real question is what are the decisions we're going to face over the next few weeks and months? And decision one is on the deal. Decision two is if the deal goes down, should there be a general election? And decision three is if there's no general election, all options must be on the table, including the option of a public vote. And that's the clear position. And Jeremy signed up to that. I'm signed up to that. And that was the position that was passed.
Is that not a bit of a worry? Labour coming toe-to-toe with the Prime Minister and the Conservatives on Brexit here, and your leader is getting it wrong. He's not towing the party line when it comes to your policy.
Well, Jeremy was dealing with an interview. He was explaining how he approached the referendum. But Jeremy and I and Emily and the whole Labour Party is absolutely behind the Labour Party policy that was laid out in September. That is our policy.
You just contradict him live on
clear.
television. This is one of the biggest events to face this country in modern history. And you are not agreeing with your leader. You're both having different stories when it comes to Brexit. You've just contradicted him live on television in possibly one of the most important weeks in the Brexit process.
She's very, very excited about herself there, wasn't she? Sarah Jane Mee. This is an exclusive. You're contradicting your leader on live television. Jeremy Corbyn is very, very quiet though, isn't he? Brexit is dead. It's not going to happen. The smugness of Keir Starmer and every other leading Remainer. Even today, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, otherwise known as an accessory to genocide in Iraq. He was in London today and he told business leaders there that he's pretty certain there will be a second referendum. I won't bother playing the audio there. And Tory MP Justine Greening, the former Education Secretary, of course, was on Adam Bolton's show this morning, good old bunter, and on the possibility that when May's pathetic offering is defeated, that Article 50 might be extended. Have a listen to Justine Greening and Adam Bunter Bolton having a little bit of a tiff.
It's all very well having discussions about Article 50, but what the British people actually need from Parliament is a clear roadmap through to how we actually do take a decision about the direction that Britain's going to take.
I mean, the problem is that if there is a deal agreed and Parliament votes it down, or if there isn't a deal agreed, it seems the most likely thing would be a crash-out, no-deal Brexit.
Which I don't think is realistic, because I'm sure Parliament...
Well, we might think it's realistic, but it's the practicality.
Well, we live in a parliamentary democracy. I think Parliament would have a motion on whether it wanted to crash out with no deal by default, and we would vote against that. And that's why, in the end, the only meaningful vote that there can really be is going to be when you actually ask people in our country what they now want to do, given these options.
The British Parliament can do all it likes. I mean, the fact is the British government has tabled Article 50, and if there is no deal, we will go out according to Article 50 without a deal. That's what the Europeans say. That's what Mrs May says.
And I don't think that will be allowed to happen.
How can you reverse it? Because, you know, as I understand it, the instruction from the Clerk of the House of Commons is that beyond voting down the deal, the government does not have to obey what Parliament tells it to do.
But that's clearly an affront to democracy and not a sustainable position.
There's a lot of affronts to democracy.
Or indeed... No, but I mean...
Huh? That was very good. No, she said. When Bolton, good old Bunter, said there's a lot of affronts to democracy out there. No, she said there's not. Remember, it's only been 2 years since 52% of the electorate voted categorically to leave the European Union. Here's a little bit more of Greening and Bolton.
Realistically, that is not a sustainable position for any government to take, certainly not one that wants to get ever re-elected again. What we need to do is have a managed process, which means setting out the clear deals in front of people, which is either the current deal, as you heard with the rebate that we already have, the existing terms, or the Prime Minister's deal that she's negotiated in good faith to try and get the best version of Brexit she thinks for Britain. Or, of course, as you say, Adam, essentially leaving on WTO rules and then getting a free trade agreement afterwards. Those are the choices. Now, clearly, parliamentarians don't agree amongst themselves about what the best route is, so we have to hand that choice back to people. And I think the sooner that Parliament recognises that, recognises its responsibility to the British people, and then sets about working out how it will deliver that choice for people, the better.
I wonder, is a second referendum inevitable now? Is it? I don't know. It might be. And again, old Jezza Corbyn, Jeremy, is very quiet. Didn't used to be quiet. Nowadays he says nothing, and has nothing negative to say about Brussels anymore. But back in the day, Jeremy had plenty to say. And here's a clip you might have come across, but you might not have come across it. This is Jeremy Corbyn on the backbenches, but it's at the Labour Party conference in 1996. So we're talking, 22 years ago. Jeremy Corbyn, Labour Party conference 96, talking about single currency, the single currency, and how undemocratic the European Union is and where it was all going to end up. Listen to Jeremy Corbyn.
My concern is that we need to be very robust against the conditions for the single currency. A single currency will lead to enormous cuts in public expenditure in Britain and a very rapid rise in unemployment. Now, he appeared to make some tilt in that direction. The other one is a concern about democracy in Europe. We have a European bureaucracy totally unaccountable to anybody. Powers have gone from national parliaments. They haven't gone to the European Parliament. They've gone to the Commission and to some extent to the Council of Ministers. These are quite serious matters.
People argue against there being a drop in public expenditure by saying that there will be economic growth to compensate.
Well, I've heard that argument before, but the reality is we have more poor in Europe per head than almost any other country. The number of people in real poverty is increasing, and the kind of cuts in public expenditure envisaged by the Maastricht criteria would lead to a massive increase in poverty and unemployment in Britain. You cannot wait for growth. You have to deal with the issue of poverty now.
And the single currency that he said would lead to widespread poverty if the UK adopted it, which the UK did not, was ultimately then seen across southern Europe. Stunning levels of poverty across southern and increasingly these days Eastern Europe. And what he said there about the Commission and how undemocratic the European Union is the only argument you ever need to make about why no country should be a member of the European Union. The EU Commission is made up of 28 unelected commissioners. I've said this a million times. And these commissioners cannot be held to account by anybody, least of all the 750 plus MEPs. It's a joke, it's a big charade, a facade. The Commission basically is the government of Europe. It looks after the treaties and it enforces European Union law. And people think when they vote for an MEP, that MEP goes to Brussels and it's the MEPs who come up with ideas and introduce laws and legislation. It's not the truth. It's not a parliament at all, because MEPs, members of the European Parliament even, unlike MPs in this country, don't have the right to propose laws. That's why I said it's a charade. The MEPs don't propose laws. They are there to make the European Union look like it is democratic when it isn't. And that's the only argument. It is the Commission, right? And the commissioners that basically, at the behest of the financial elites of the world, by the way, they introduce laws and legislation and ultimately enforce them And your local MEP has no say in the matter whatsoever. It's the biggest farce on planet Earth. And it's the only argument you or anybody else needs when explaining to somebody why membership of the European Union makes no sense. Because ultimately, 28 commissioners basically decide chapter and verse what can and cannot go on inside the borders of sovereign countries. But of course, they're not sovereign, because the minute you join the European Union, the single market and the customs union, you've handed your sovereignty over to 28 unelected commissioners, led by Jean-Claude Ever, a drunker even these days. That's it. That's not subjective. That's the truth. That's what it is. Can't hold them to account. And the European Union, no accountant in the world has agreed or would agree to sign off on its accounts. Its accounts have not been signed off for over 30 years now. Such is the level of corruption and criminality, I should say, that goes on there. I'm going to leave that one there now. And I'm going to read a few tweets is what I'm going to do. It's 26 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. Nick Kollerstrom is standing by. Top man is Nick. We'll get him on now in a second. Thanks for the tweets I've had thus far. David Stanford says, Richie, it was never meant to be voted for to leave, says David. Base Ninja tweets, second referendum will happen. I'm 1,000,000% convinced. Maybe a billion, that is. Maybe he's saying a billion. Richie says, Moinga, people are happily choosing to be microchipped are the same people who have no problem with the government spying on them. You might be right. There is a brigade. There is a train of thought. Well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about, which is nonsense. David tweets, cartoon drunk, who is David. I rarely watch Jeremy Kyle, Richie, but there was a transgender uncle on today who now wants to be referred to as Auntie. But since she changed gender, all her family now refer to her as Auntie Christ, says David. Yeah, it is a bit mad, all right. It is a bit mad. Hi to Sharon. How you doing, Sharon? Finally able to make it in real time from across the pond, Richie. Gender assignment at birth makes it sound like there was some kind of choice on how babies are assigned rather than biologically born as. My God, says Sharon. Paul tweets, did you say Anthony Rogers right? Surely his name is non-inclusive. How is there a right way to Roger someone? It sounds a bit bigoted to me, says Paul. See what you did there, Paul. I see what you did. Loads of tweets on the microchipping. Hi to Patricia. How you doing, Patricia? Anyone who voluntarily chooses to put a chip in their body is too effing stupid to understand the potential consequences, in my opinion, says Patricia. Absolutely right. And the fader shouldn't have been up there. Anyway, it's a Monday, and these things do happen on a Monday. Welcome to the Richie Allen Show. If you're just joining me, it's exactly 25 minutes to the top of the hour. Let me introduce my guest today. He's not been on with us for quite a while, but he's an old friend of mine. I did mention at the top of the programme that I came across him when he wrote an outstanding book called Terror on the Tube, which was published around about, I'm thinking, 2008 or 2009. And it is the definitive account of the truth of what took place in London on the 7th of July 2005. I haven't read many books that so clinically deconstructed and then debunked the official narrative about a massive event as that was, with so many people losing their lives. If you haven't read it, I recommend you read it. It is Terror on the Tube. Let's welcome back to the programme my old friend Nick Kollerstrom. Nick, thanks for coming back on. How are you?
Hi there, Richie. Can you hear me all right?
I'm hearing you loud and clear, Nick. Great to have you back on the show. It's been ages. Now, you got in touch with me over the weekend, and you've been writing about the Skripal affair. And I have to say, I've read your article thoroughly. And again, I think it's excellent. And you throw up a lot of really interesting questions about this particular case. I don't think I have to remind the listeners of what the Skripal case is. They will know by now that, officially anyway, former Russian spy who defected, for want of a better word, and went to work for MI5 or MI6, I should say, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia were allegedly poisoned by the nerve agent Novichok in Salisbury a few months ago.
Right.
You've been looking at it. It's been a massive story, and it's been used to bash and to demonise the Russian government. It's been used for a lot of different reasons. You've been having a look at it, and you're not happy, Nick, with some of the things that you're finding out. I am going to tweet a link to your article, by the way. Tell us about this case. What first kind of grabbed your attention?
I think this is the most brazen pack of lies by British intelligence. I think it's the worst since the Iraq dodgy dossier. And we've been hammered with it all this year. It's been used to expel 200 diplomats worldwide. So the main achievement of May's government, I'd say, is that of kind of ruining East-West relations with this story. And it's just so incoherent. I mean, it starts off, well, where does it start? I think it starts off with the Novichok story on TV the previous November. There was a big thriller called Strike Back, which imagined Novichok as a Russian deadly poison that was used for sort of skullduggery. And those series were just going on Sky TV, Britain and America. March the 2nd, there was an instalment, which was just a day before Yulia flew over to Salisbury, to England. And then March the 4th, that the event on the park bench supposedly happened. So I think this story came out of a British spy fantasy. And I think we also need to bear in mind that Russia had very thoroughly destroyed all its chemical biological weapons the previous year and was recorded that by the OPCW, that's inspects the chemical weapons destruction stockpiles, whereas in contrast, Porton Down had been receiving over the last decade massive grants from the Pentagon for researching and developing chemical and biological weapons. So I think there's deep hypocrisy here.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about Strike Back just for a second. By the way, this is really good stuff, folks. I have tweeted the article out. It's on Twitter. But just go to terroronthetube.co.uk. Nick, this is great. Before we get to the proximity of Porton Down to Salisbury, let's talk about that Strike Back. You see, until I read your article, I never knew there was a spy thriller, there was a TV show, and that a year before this alleged poisoning incident, they did a story about a nerve agent, a Novichok. This is incredible. What would you call that, Nick? Some sort of predictive programming? How would you describe that?
Predictive programming is exactly what it is, and it was several months before, starting in November. And let's be clear that Novichok is not a recognised nerve agent by this official OPCW. It's not on anybody's list of banned substances, so nobody really knew what it was. It comes out of Storyland, and when this allegation is made, the first thing everyone's wondering is, what is Novichok supposed to be? So they claimed in the TV programme, they claimed it was a binary munitions, which means you mix two things together and it makes this deadly poison. So Porton Down was sort of consulted, and that may have had to, that they would without doubt have whatever Novichok was supposed to be. That's the thing. And they probably supplied, in the end, whatever was required for the British government for this story.
This is mad. I mean, the show. I suppose the longer you look into things with a more forensic eye, the more you have to discount. Sometimes you just have to discount coincidences. It's just too much of a coincidence that you have a television program dealing with this very unusual, very kind of exotic in terms of nobody had ever heard of it. This agent, and then
in terms of what actually happened, we'll probably never know. But Sergei Skripal was very stressed up because he'd been involved in various sort of dodgy agents, something to do with the Democrat Party paying for a load of dirt on Trump, which then backfired. And the guy who was the handler of Sergei Skripal, a guy called Pablo Miller, he was somewhat involved with this Orbis company that produced the this dossier of alleged Russian interference. And a lot of people suspect that Sergei Skripal would have been roped in as a former Russian spy to write this allegation of Russian influence. So he was quite stressed up.
Tell us about Pablo Miller, Nick. Sorry to ask you to just stay with that, because the reason I ask you about Pablo Miller is, folks, if you go to Nick's article, there's a series of photographs, very interesting photographs. And you think that some of these photographs, or one of them anyway, was taken by this Pablo Miller character. Who is he, Nick?
Oh, yeah, right. Well, what was the first thing the government did when this whole story broke in the days after March the 4th? They slapped not one but 2 D notices on the press. And just to remind you, D notice is something where the press not only can't talk about a subject, but isn't even allowed to say they've had a D notice slapped on them. And the main thing they weren't allowed to talk about was the connection of Sergei Skripal with his MI6 handler called Pablo Miller, who is in turn linked to Christopher Steele, who runs this Orbis intelligence company. So there's a whole, and Pablo Miller also lives in Salisbury. So he wasn't just a retired double agent, this fella, Sergei Skripal. He was still being used. So I think that's why he was quite stressed up. And
so he was active then. You think Skripal was still actively working for MI6? Yeah,
and he's got a good friend in Salisbury, one good friend, a chap called Ross Cassidy, who drove him out on the 3rd to pick up his daughter from the airport. And Ross talks about how nervous and jumpy he was just then. One theory is that it was just food poisoning from this Zizi restaurant. The two of them, after they met up the next day, they went to a pub, they strolled around town, they went into this restaurant, and then they strolled down this avenue and supposedly collapsed on the bench. And it's very strange. There's no photographs whatever of them collapsing on the bench. Indeed, of them being in town, really, apart from at that Zizi restaurant. So it is possible that it was just food poisoning that they got. And the very earliest report we have of whatever was happening on that bench, that they were throwing up and generally in a bad state. Seafood can do that to people just occasionally.
It can, but there is. It's interesting, this, Nick, because I've had a dose of food poisoning. I think most people probably have, but I had fish-based food poisoning some years ago. It was a nasty thing. But doesn't food poisoning generally take quite a few hours to take effect, doesn't it? It does, doesn't it?
Well,
it would be unusual.
It did with me, yeah.
Yeah, it takes a bit of time, doesn't it, to kind of manifest.
Yeah, that is the point. The report the next day, the official medical report from the Salisbury Journal and a medical journal as to what happened in the hospital said that they were treated for fentanyl. Fentanyl is a kind of drug. I don't know.
It's a date rape drug. I mean, again,
a date rape drug. Yeah, it makes people floppy and limp and dozy. And that was what they actually, before the Novichok story appeared, that was what they were being treated for. Okay.
And Nick, I want to stay with this just for a second. This is very important because there will be obviously listeners listening to this and they will think, oh, here we go again. Richie and his mate are saying that, it's all a big conspiracy. But it's very important to point out that what Nick is saying is true, because obviously reading his article over the weekend and then kind of cross-referencing the claims made by Nick is right. Very early on they were saying that this date rape drug was used against them. And Nick, remind us, who made those claims about this fentanyl drug? That's very important, that.
Yeah. The fentanyl drug was made in the Salisbury Journal, March the 5th. Emergency service at the scene suspect the substance may have been a powerful drug called fentanyl. And they might have copied that from the UK Clinical Services Journal website, which posted up a story on the 5th, which is archived. And that says a major incident after 2 patients were exposed to an opioid, which fentanyl is an opioid. So I think that is the initial source. I think it's.
No, you're right. It's very important. The Clinical Services Journal put this out, and they were certain that fentanyl, which is a drug that makes you drowsy, sleepy, and a bit easy to manipulate, it must be said. That's why some bastards use it by dropping it into people's drinks, and that's really important. That this is on the 5th of March, the Salisbury Journal. And that just disappeared,
didn't it? Hospital, and we don't hear anything more from them. They kind of vanish, and nobody's allowed to see them at all. The closest friends, closest relatives, Ross Cassidy, none of them can get to see them, and the dreadful accusations made on March the 12th against Russia, that somehow the British government reckons that whatever's happened to these two is from Russia. It never provides any credible evidence. And then a few days later, the massive expulsion of Russian diplomats begins. So this is a very extraordinary action, I would say, without decent evidence. And I think the one politician people have been listening to on the story is Craig Murray, who
former ambassador,
former ambassador, and I think he's been very sound in talking about the way, for example, Porton Down has not confirmed any basis for a Russian origin of the poison.
That's important to mention, Nick, because didn't Boris Johnson, who was then the Foreign Secretary, didn't he tell a pack of lies, didn't he? Didn't he say, Johnson, that he'd been to...
He certainly did, yeah.
He said, I went to Porton Down and they told me it originated in Russia. And they immediately said, the Porton Down people said, no, we didn't say that.
Yeah, they did, yeah. And Craig Murray accused him of being Boris Johnson of being a total liar.
Well, he is
on
obviously.
the subject.
Yeah,
I mean it's a dreadfully poisonous accusation, and they. Well, I just quote Craig Murray. He says, "Porton Down has not positively identified this as Novichok, as opposed to a closely related agent. Even if it were a Novichok, that would not prove manufacture in Russia." So, given that we're not quite sure what Novichok is supposed to be, there's no trail back to Russia in this story.
And you know, at the time, this program, like every other program, covered the story at the time, and it was a bizarre claim made by skeptics, and I was glad the skeptics made the claim. They made a claim at the time that instructions on how to make Novichok are readily available through a book that you could order through Amazon.com or .co.uk, and that a basic numpty like me, I'm not very good at my hands, Nick, I'm not very good at making things or building things, but apparently I could get this book and make it very easily, and I investigated that and found it to be true.
Yeah, it should be whatever it's alleged to be, quite easily made on a laboratory bench if anyone wanted to make it. Yeah,
not so sophisticated as we were told, basically, at the time, you know, that only the Russians could have made it and all of that nonsense. The truth was that you and I could have made it. Let me just remind our listeners, Nick, it's great to have Nick Kollerstrom back on the programme. It's been a long time. terroronthetube.co.uk is where you'll find this excellent clinical examination of what we have been told. It's what Nick Kollerstrom does, you see. He looks at what you've been told by the UK press and by the establishment and picks holes in it where holes can be picked in it. And he's found a lot of holes in this particular story.
Yeah, let's just say, Richie, that for 100 years, British intelligence has had the role of fabricating untruths so as to demonise other countries, so as to ratify war and conflict. We're one of the top world's weapons exporters, and that gives this horrible motivation to create kind of rationale for NATO expansion and so on with these horribly poisoned claims, which make out that somebody's acting with a diabolical motive. I would say that's the overall game that is going on here with what is called British intelligence.
Nick, you're an academic. You're an academic, and I mean, you've lectured, you've given thousands of lectures to students over the years, and I suppose, like every other academic, and like our mutual friend Jim Fetzer, who specialised for years in critical thinking, what has happened, Nick, to humanity? What has happened to man? The question is interesting, I think.
Well, yeah.
Why do we swallow stuff, Nick? Why do we? Go ahead.
Remember when an Englishman's word was his bond? You know.
Yeah.
The English diplomat, politician, is supposed to speak with words of integrity, and how has that changed around?
But who do you blame, Nick? Who do you blame? Do you blame the lawyers? Or the question I was going to ask you is, what has happened to people that they have lost their ability to say, pull the other one now? I mean, when they were saying that this stuff
I think a lot of people do disbelieve it. I would say British intelligence has, if its ability is lost, its ability to tell coherent lies. I mean, the story, say we looked before at the London bombing, there was some coherence in the fabricated stories that they gave us. But now, I mean, we're told this deadly military-grade nerve gas, 1 or 2 drops is enough to blah, blah, blah. Loads of people in Salisbury are affected by it. And then what happens a few weeks later? Yulia rings up her cousin Victoria and says, no, wait, we're fine.
Yeah.
And my father's getting better and he'll soon be better and we'd like to come back to Russia. And suddenly that's laughing, let's sort of call it Easter resurrection part of this story. Suddenly, that phone call is broadcast in Russia, and nobody's questioned or denied its authenticity. Okay, so it is a real phone call from Yulia while she was still in the hospital, and to her cousin Victoria saying, "Look, everything's okay. My father's resting now. He's sleeping. No one has had any irreversible harm. I'm being discharged soon." So the whole British story then fell apart and became incoherent.
Yeah, because while she was telling her cousin that, the UK diplomats were in New York at the UN screaming about horror stories, weren't they? About how horrific this stuff is and it's dreadful and all of that. And yet she was speaking to her cousin.
Worse than that, they would make up another story in Syria, in Douma, another chemical weapons attack alleged. The White Helmets, a British group, were making another fictional story to justify demonising Syrian government. So the kind of two made-up British stories going in parallel here, which is it's rather amazing that they can want to do that.
Yeah, but I'm going to argue with you now. You and I are going to have our first disagreement today. You said that more and more people are alive to it. I don't believe it, Nick, because I'm living in suburban Manchester. I'm surrounded by people, some of whom know about this programme, most of whom who do not, it must be said, to be honest, and they completely buy this stuff hook, line and sinker. And the question I was going to ask you, where has the incredulity gone, Nick? We're told that this stuff was smeared. It was smeared on the door knocker, and people just buy this. Why? Why, Nick? What's happened to us that we don't just say, pull the other one?
Zizzy restaurant. A fiendish Russian agent puts. Then they found nobody believed that, so they said, "Oh wait, no, it's the car door handle." And they found nobody believed that, and they said, "Oh no, wait, it's Yulia's suitcase. Yulia brought it from Moscow," and still nobody believed that. So it ends up 3 weeks later. That door handle story was 3 weeks after March the 4th. They finally said, "Oh yeah, it's on the door handle." I mean, obviously, if anything had been there, sniffer dogs would have noticed it right away. So,
of course they would.
It's fairly impossible, and that became even more impossible when later in September that they got these two Russian tourists and claimed these were administering the deadly nerve agent, right? And the whole timing became more and more impossible because they'd got the two Skripals out in their car at 1:30 in the afternoon, right, driving off. That's a definite time they've given us. And the two Russians, if they had headed straight for the Skripals' home, we don't have any evidence they did, they would have got there a bit after noon. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So they would not have had much time. And then you've got you've got a picture of the two Russians some distance away at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They're just happily walking on the pavement. So you've hardly got any time for them to do this deadly deed and then walk off.
No, and it took a long time for the pictures of these guys to surface too. It was almost like an afterthought.
6 months, yeah.
6 months before we see these two guys that have been blamed for it.
Yeah, certainly that finally they have to be given 6 months later. Yeah. Anyway, let's come back to the most surreal part of this whole story, if I may, Richie.
Go ahead.
When Yulia makes a comeback, she reappears once and only once in a media reappearance, May the 23rd. So all this total global repercussions of Trump announcing sanctions against Russia and everything, and Yulia then and the cat gets put down. Yeah, let me just mention that the cat gets put down, and the two Skripals are alive. So all this expulsion of diplomats is, and the only thing dead is a cat, right?
The cat, that's right. Yeah,
that's the only thing really dead in this story. So the whole story is in danger of becoming kind of not just absurd, but kind of a bit humorous.
It's farcical, right? It's a farce. It's classic French farce, this.
That's right. Yeah, it is really. Anyway, May the 23rd, you see this new slimline Yulia. She walks out of a path, out of a wood, a nice path, and then she sits down in a chair, very demure, and she reads out a prepared speech. Now, everybody noticed that you've also got the earlier pictures of Yulia in the Zizzy restaurant with her father, okay? And you've got a few early pictures of her. All right, now the early pictures of her, she's kind of frumpy, round face with glasses, fairly thin hair, and the parting is on her right.
That's right. And you've got these pictures on your article, or in your article, which I've tweeted out. Yeah.
So she's got glasses, and she looks quite similar to her dad, round face, and there's no slim, and she's quite plump. This new slimline Julia got a nice waistline and much thicker hair, and the party's on the other side. She doesn't need glasses, and she's got this total slimline appearance. And well, I recently gave a talk to the Open Mind Conference in Ireland on this, and I asked the audience, and 10 to 1, they did not believe it was the same person.
They thought, and you think, that the woman who gave that brief statement to the world's media, well, it was a piece to camera. They didn't give any clues as to where she was. And then everybody broadcast it, went around the world. You think that might be a different woman to the woman pictured sitting down with her dad, and you've put several pictures from several different restaurants.
Is the suspicion. You know, we'd like this clarified a bit. I mean, if anyone could get to see Ross Cassidy, I think he's a totally genuine fellow, ask him which of those he saw on March the 3rd. You know, that's the kind of thing that we'd like, but obviously we aren't going to get. So I would say that there's a sort of joke about Novichok as some amazing elixir and beauty treatment. What it seems to have done to Yulia. You know.
I mean, you could argue that if she had been poisoned, that she would lose quite a bit of weight. You could argue that. You could also argue that. Now, I'm just making these arguments because
could do, yeah. You did lose weight in hospital, but but the point is that is the only appearance you ever get of her. She says over the telephone. She also, there's another phone call to her grandmother in July that she's getting better, she's coming out, she hopes to be back to Russia and so on. So we've got 2 recorded telephone messages where she says she's going to appear and she's okay, she's getting better. And that is the only time she ever appears on that very stage.
Yeah, and the Russians themselves have been really cheesed off about this because they've banged on about this, saying, well, you know, where's the access and why have we not seen any photographs of Sergei? Why hasn't Sergei spoken? We're worried about him. We're worried about, you know, how he might be. And it's quite bizarre that all this took place in March. We've had this one brief appearance by Yulia Skripal.
One brief appearance, yeah.
And nothing from the man himself, the man of the hour, nothing from Sergei Skripal. And you,
absolutely nothing.
You wonder about whether he's alive or not, do you, Nick?
Well, that is the nasty feeling. I mean, objectively speaking, the only thing that's really happening in this whole story is that 2 Russian citizens have been abducted by the British government and possibly killed.
Killed, yeah.
That is the one definite thing you know. You haven't got any real evidence of... I mean, there were blood samples taken, which might have been from those 2, and one suspects that something resembling Novichok was added to them by Portendown, and they were given to the Swiss laboratories to check, but that only happened. The OPCW was only invited 2 weeks after the event, which is a long time that anything could have happened. You know.
Here's the $64 million question. My guest is Nick Kollerstrom, academic, author, researcher, public speaker. Nick, I have to ask this question.
Oh, yeah.
If they're going to do this, to demonize Russia, if they're going to set Russia, how can they be so incompetent? You see, I find it hard to believe. Not you're asking some excellent questions. They deserve to be answered.
Yeah. Well, all I can say
how can they be so stupid, Nick, to mess it up so badly?
If a story is made up, if something didn't really happen, then you get different lots of storytellers coming along. Someone noticed this with government stories, and the next lot of storytellers, maybe a few months later, think they can improve on the last lot.
Yeah.
You know, or they want to set up a scene like the people who set up the immediate appearance of the new Yulia may not feel too responsible for the earlier narratives that were put out.
Let's ask the audience, Nick, because you and I have got about 20 more minutes, 23 more minutes to speak today, which is plenty of time. Just before we carry on speaking, I'm just going to remind our listeners, folks, as I speak to you there, I'm putting out another tweet to Nick's article. I've tweeted it several times. I want to do a quick straw poll of the audience, at least the audience that's got access to Twitter. What do you think, folks? Go on to the article now, click on it, scroll down to the pictures, and look at the screen grab of Yulia addressing the media in May, and tell me if you go along with Nick's suspicion, if you think that that picture is different. It's a different person to the pictures of her with her dad in the various restaurant scenes. So just let me know. I'm not trying to catch Nick out, not at all. No, because I believe you when you said at the conference that the conference attendees agreed that it looked like a different woman. So I want our listeners to tell us. Let us know. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. This is really important stuff, folks, by the way. Nick Kollerstrom, terroronthetube.co.uk. Read the article. If you haven't read the book Terror on the Tube, read it, folks, about the 7th of July. Yeah, let me read a tweet, Nick, and then it's back over to you. Let me read a quick tweet from Patricia, who's listening to this in Switzerland. Why don't more people question the official story of almost anything, asks Patricia. If the plan was to reduce critical thinking through fluoride in the water, genetically modified food and chemtrails, etc., I would suggest mission has been accomplished. Is that why we've become so dumb and so placid and so docile, Nick? Fluoride, the food being affected, chemtrails, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'll say our sanity has been rescued by two sources where intelligent debate goes on. One is the Off Guardian, and the other is Craig Murray. On those blogs, you get a whole lot of people discussing it, and they are so bewildered, but you get intelligent discussion there. And the amazing thing is you do not get it anywhere in the mainstream media. That is what's so bewildering, except for Russian sources, Yeah. So we are in that very stressful situation. There's nothing in the printed media worth reading where they're even bothered about the incoherence of what they say,
Yeah, nobody. Isn't it shocking? And there was a bizarre incident on Sky News, wasn't there, several months ago, where a former high-ranking British military officer was basically cut off mid-sentence when he was talking about the kind of lack of practicality of why Russia would do it. He was actually saying to the Sky News presenter, this doesn't make sense to me at all. I don't understand why Russia would do it. And I think he was talking about deploying chemical weapons in Syria.
Yeah, well, especially just before the World Cup. I mean,
that's right. And he was just cut off mid-sentence. Oh, sorry, we have to go now. This is how they operate, Well, it's anyway, just terrible.
While we're waiting for any queries or comments, perhaps we could just look at what the wise words of Sergio's friend Ross Cassidy. He's talking about the house where they live in, the Skripal's house, okay? And it's at the end of a cul-de-sac. So you stroll down this cul-de-sac and the house faces you, and Sergei has his office in a converted garage so that he faces up along that cul-de-sac path. And he says whenever he'd go and visit his friend Sergei, he would normally open the door before he'd knocked because he'd see him coming up the road. So he's pointing out it's totally impossible, inconceivable that two Russians could stroll up that road towards the house unless they knew for certain that the Skripals weren't in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a possibility.
Well, I don't know how they'd know that, but his view was that if they were going to do that, they'd have to do it at night time, which kind of makes sense. But I mean, the British government is trapped in a position now when that poison, nerve agent, has to be put on the door handle around noon of the 4th of March.
Nobody, no credible assassin on planet Earth. Not that I know anything about assassinating people. I don't. But I've read enough accounts. I've been a journalist long enough. No assassin would smear stuff on a door handle and hope that the person, that it would be strong enough for the person to touch it and ingest it. It's just, to me, it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Especially on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah,
when people are out sort of cleaning their car and stuff. I mean, it's a story that one is puzzled that anyone in the British government can even try to believe it or appear to believe it. Well,
it's
in a sense.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry. Go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I would say one response of the government. See, once you started lying, you go along a certain track and you have to keep going. You can't back out. So sorry, we just made all that up. And I would say they reached a point where the story was becoming very incoherent and they realised that they needed a real death. Now, this may sound cruel, but for state fabricated terror, the solemnity, the gravitas, which makes all the journalists believe what you're saying, comes from the real deaths normally. And so the terrible thing is that the event is staged so that people really die, and then then you won't be bothered by people doubting the story. That's very much the original and general dreadful principle of state fabricated terror. So what happens in June is that you get a story of 2 homeless drug addicts in Salisbury.
Oh, this is unbelievable. Is this the craziest thing that you've ever been asked to believe by your government, is it? It's up there, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about Dawn Sturgis now. Again, we don't laugh. We don't laugh. And we find nothing funny, none of us do, about this woman dying if that's the case. But the idea, this is the perfume bottle story, right?
Perfume bottle, yeah.
This is madness.
Suddenly this thing is in a perfume bottle and it can spray on, you can spray it on, and somehow these 2 Russians, after they'd done this deadly deed, what did they do? Oh, they just thought they'd go for a stroll through Salisbury historic old park, Queen Elizabeth Park, and they just dumped it in some waste container, as you would, and they just happened to stay there for 4 months. You know, the park wardens didn't clean it out, and the police hunting everywhere for clues didn't find it. So 4 months later, this guy who's accustomed to rummaging around in bins picks out this perfume bottle and he gives it to his partner as a present. As you do, by the way, Nick. You know what I mean? I mean, it's ridiculous. I tried to be the devil's advocate, Nick. You and I have been mates. I've spoken to you for years. I've argued with you about different things. You know, we do disagree on things. We argue. You know, you try and be the devil's advocate. I can't make a credible case for that story. It's ridiculous. No, well, I wonder if the numbers somehow playing in here. You've got 66-year-old Sergei, 33-year-old Julia, and then 44-year-old drug addict Dawn Sturgis. I just wonder if they...
Masonic Lodge numbers, right?
I just wondered if they thought they could pull those together somehow.
Right, anyway, we've heard from our listeners. Just before you go on, we've heard from a few listeners. We thought we would. Bernie Galway, how you doing, Bernie? Hard to tell. Read the pictures in Nick's article, says Bernie. People's appearances can vary in photographs. He's not decided. Sharon tweets, I'm not sure. I think it might be the same woman. I think she's had a makeover. A good professional can really change the look of someone, and her eye shape and lashes are very much the same. But however, some people do agree with Nick. Diane tweets, I think what the intelligence services are doing is testing to see exactly how much BS they can get away with. That's Diane in Ireland. Faisal tweets, it's either a different Yulia or she's had an expensive makeover and health farm visit instead of a bout of Novichok hospitalisation. Natalie tweets, definitely a nose job, slightly different shape, but I would need more to compare. So kind of 50-50 with the listeners there on the photographs, right. Nick. Yeah, which is fair enough.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
By the way, I looked at the photographs and I think I understand why you think it's a different woman, and I can't tell. So I don't know. I can't dispute your findings.
None of those contributors have talked about how her parting can switch over. Also, the hair is much thicker and it sort of rustles as she moves. You should really, let me just say this to all those who are phoning. There is a video, I think I put a link to it. There's a video of her reading out that story and walking down the path, which it might help you to see, right? Her elegance and poise, and the way her hair rustles, and it's much thicker, and it's party on the other side. So I think possibly those who've commented haven't tried to evaluate the party of the hair switching over, which isn't just a makeover. That isn't just a beauty treatment, is it?
No, Graham tweets, very doubtful. The face is a different shape. Graham agrees with you. Delroy tweets, I think Novichok must be an elixir beauty treatment because those two girls do not look the same to me, says Delroy. Listeners coming down on your side here, Nick. Susan tweets, I still think Nick's critical thinking is spot on though. For the most part, who's to say UK MI6 didn't do unnecessary operations to Yulia to make it look good? That's based on the theory that Yulia and Sergei are in on the whole hoax. That they're still deep. Well, he's still a deep cover agent for the UK government, which you've not discounted as a possibility. To be fair to you,
he is still involved with MI6. I appreciate this. And I mean, in terms of the motive, what could be the motive? I mean, this is just conspiracy theorists surmising. Okay, was that he wanted to return to Russia because his relatives in England were dead, and he's got a grandmother in Russia, and Yulia lived in Russia, and he wanted to go back there. But Russia would only take him back if he spilled the beans about this dirty dossier on Trump, alleging that Trump was getting Russian influence in the election and so on. If he was going to spill the beans on that, then Russia would take him, and for that reason, British intelligence wouldn't allow him to go back, and he had to be taught a lesson. And so what's happened to him? Now that's all conjecture, but that's how the conspiracy theory goes. Okay. Are you with me?
Of course, yeah. Look, I'm open-minded. I'm prepared to consider any possibility. Yeah. I think we know the stories are nonsense. We know.
Yeah, and for readers who don't like that, sorry, listeners who don't like the conspiracy theory, you have got the much simpler option that they just got hit by food poisoning in the Zizzy restaurant, and it went on from there. That it wasn't as such premeditated. Okay, if you don't like that idea of British intelligence planning to zap him, that is an alternative. Okay, if I could just finish this just with Dawn Sturgis. And what happened to her? One night, she was on the floor having a fit, foaming at the mouth, and people thought, oh, wait a minute, maybe that's Novichok. Oh, yeah, could be, why not? And something similar happened to her partner, and so she died. And then there was a post-mortem, which was then adjourned, no verdict, okay? So we have no medical report that she had Novichok in her blood or was poisoned by Novichok. That may be resumed next year, that post-mortem.
There'll be an inquest, right?
Yeah.
There is an
inquest. The inquest be adjourned. And other people complained that what should have been her funeral was that we weren't really shown it at all. You were just shown some hearse being carried along a road and nothing terribly convincing that you'd expect about her death. It's rather unclear if she's really died or if so, what she died of, But I would say that this is a story that keeps sort of dragging on, and the Dawn Sturgis part of the story was partly to distract you from incoherent parts of the story earlier on.
That's why you think that's your best guess, Nick, as to why that was introduced, that aspect of the story.
Yeah, to stop people scoffing at it. You've got a real death, it becomes very serious. And then, as we've already touched on, after massive sanctions have been applied on Russia, still without any Russia complaining, there's no coherent evidence for this, and every reason why they wouldn't want to do it. Then the two Russian suspects are brought in, and there's only one bit of evidence that the British police have that why they've done it, okay? The only bit of evidence is in the hotel which these two stayed at, they found traces of Novichok in the bedroom. Okay?
Madness, yeah. Again, you're assuming that these guys are absolutely incompetent. This is kind of Clouseau-esque type stuff, if this was true. And yet we know that people that are given jobs like assassinating people and taking people out are bastards, first of all, but are very, very efficient generally at what they do, and they don't leave traces behind, and they don't appear on cameras. They're not stupid.
Anyway, ridiculous. We did have a statement by the owner of the hotel. We've got the name of the hotel in, I think it's in London, and he says that this was the first he heard about it. So September the 4th, when the story breaks, they claim to have found Novichok in the hotel room, and the owner of the hotel says, well, this is the first he's heard about it. And the implication here is that other guests have been staying in that room for months without the hotel owner knowing that the police claim there's Novichok in the room, which is, that's pretty well impossible, isn't it?
Impossible, yeah.
That they can go into a room, search it for Novichok, and the hotel owner doesn't even know about it.
Doesn't know about it. And then guests continue to use that room, presumably putting them in grave danger of being exposed to a toxic substance. The litigation would be going on for years.
Well, it would, yeah.
Millions you'd be talking about. Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
what about the Russians, Nick? I mean, have the Russians done all the Russians can do in terms of just denying it? Is that all they can do, really? Because, again, one of the things that there's a very interesting and a very concerning aspect to this, and that is that RT, which is available at the moment to satellite television subscribers in the United Kingdom, there is a concern, and I think
Available on digital as well, isn't it? I can get RT.
Is that right? So you can, but
yeah, it's a very good program, very fine program.
That's right.
Let's hope they don't axe that.
Well, I was just going to say, maybe not for much longer. Some of the RT contributors, people like George Galloway and one of the presenters, Afstin Ratanzi, I hope I've probably pronounced that wrong.
Yeah, right.
They've been expressing their concerns that RT might go the way of Press TV and that Ofcom might withdraw its license to broadcast here in the UK, and I think that's not beyond the bounds of possibility.
Well, that would certainly be a terrible thing, wouldn't it? I mean, it's
Absolutely.
the one kind of that and Press TV were real voices of sanity, where humane people would humane, truthful people would discuss what's happening in the world, and it certainly would be a very dire development. I mean, I think we need to emphasise that. There's a total pack of Brit lies from British intelligence, and there just isn't anything. There isn't anything much that the Russians can answer, because there's no valid accusation against them.
Well, the government broke international treaties by not giving the Russians the chance to properly respond, by not sharing some of the evidence with them. Again, this is basic.
I mean, Russia requested a United Nations discussion of this matter, and Britain declined. Russia immediately requested to have a blood sample to analyse of what this alleged substance was. British government declined. I mean, it's as if we don't have diplomats anymore. We just have people who will insult Russia and just scoff at international obligations. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but that seems to be where we've come to.
Yeah, and there's very little opposition to that. I mean,
let's just note. Sorry, interrupt.
No, I was just going to say, look, I've interviewed Piers Corbyn many times on this program, and I like Piers. I know I know you know Piers and Mark Windows, and I've all the time in the world for those guys. But I'm not shy when I speak to Piers Corbyn. I'm not shy about pointing out to him that on these issues, his brother's been pretty useless. In terms of when he's scoffed at and when he's called Comrade Corbyn, he's not very quick to come out fighting, which he should do, because he's got the national platform at the moment for however long it lasts, and it's a great time for him to say, listen, this is bullshit. Excuse me, this is nonsense. You know, why are we being told this stuff? Why are we being told that we must believe, as you said brilliantly earlier on, coherent liars? Why are we being told we must believe them? Why are we not allowed to point out inconsistencies in their story?
The power of truth is the only thing that can defeat the empire, and I do wish Labour would try to understand this a bit more. I mean, it can't go too far. Generally speaking, what we call state fabricated terror is beyond what any of the political parties will contemplate. That they won't acknowledge the possibility of it. But I think this Skripal event is interesting, kind of in-between case that people like, I mentioned Craig Murray in the Off Guardian, do analyse this and have exposed it. And
you think it's overkill, Nick? Do you think it's overkill? Like, if they keep doing this type of thing, even the most, I don't want to use bloody terms like asleep because it's a bit lazy, but even those amongst us who never question anything, do you think that the way the intelligence agencies are going, that they might end up cutting off their own noses, basically, because it's overkill?
We always wonder, can there be any media outlet that will deconstruct events like this, or is it just kind of repressed onto the web? I'll give you an example. I listened to a really good LBC discussion interview by a chap called Mark Urban, who's the defence editor for the BBC, and he'd written a book about this, about the Skripal case, and it turned out that he'd been interviewing Sergei Skripal for this project, this book, starting in the previous year. So his interviews started in 2017, and he didn't declare this. He was rather reluctant to explain why he was doing this. Also, the connection he had with Pablo Miller. He'd been in the same tank regiment as Pablo Miller. So he's got these intelligence connections.
What was he doing? Sorry, Nick, hang on. He was writing or helping Skripal to write his memoirs, was he? He was ghostwriting a book for Skripal. I haven't heard of
Skripal writing it. He was writing this book that he's now published.
Right.
He said he was researching a book,
All right, about spies,
Skripal.
maybe. About spies. Or was it about Skripal specifically?
About Skripal.
Right,
Specifically about Skripal, the previous year.
Right.
And this book is now published in, I think, November, just come out. It's the only book there is that he's doing. So he starts doing this the year before, and he's got this close connection with Pablo Miller. So I think he's very involved with the group of intelligence agents that may have...
well, he has connections anyway.
Has connections. And the BBC did not acknowledge this, or would not acknowledge this when they're being asked about the Skripal story. How come the guy who writes the book starts interviewing him the year before it happens, and this sort of thing?
Was he used? Did the BBC use this guy Mark Orban? Did they use him to report on the breaking story at the time? Because if they did, that would be very interesting. If they put him on, the roster,
I think he was the guy called out as the spokesperson. Diplomatic and defence editor for the BBC.
And they did not disclose that the guy was actually working with Skripal on a book.
No, they didn't. No, not until I think June of this year it finally came out.
Curiouser and curiouser, eh?
People asked him, well, how come? Why didn't you say that earlier? So this book published is kind of rather questionable and part of the British story.
Well, we need to get you. Well, you need to get your hands on a copy of it because obviously, you're following it closely. We're just about out of time, Nick. I must say, for today, we're about 2 minutes away from being out of time. It's a really good piece, Nick. It really is. Like I said,
let's hope there's some further development. Maybe one of your listeners will find some further development that give us a clue about what's happened and whether the two Skripals are still alive.
Well, that's right. It is utterly inconceivable. It's not. I shouldn't say inconceivable. It's again, to use that term, farcical. It's farcical that nobody in the press is demanding access to Sergei, even at an undisclosed location. I mean, if the press was worth its salt, if it was worth anything, they'd be saying, look, we need to speak to this guy. You've given us this story. We've taken you at your word. Now it's time that we get access to Sergei Skripal properly, but they haven't been doing that. He's not been pictured, photographed, filmed or anything. It's crazy, I'm going to give you the final word, Nick, and then we'll wrap it up for today. Great work, by the way. Go ahead.
Well, I'm very pro-Russian these days, Richie. I think they do adhere to treaties, and their politicians do have integrity, and they understand basic concepts of diplomacy, which involves courtesy between nations. And I think Britain seems to have lost all that, and we have these completely boorish entities who practically lie for their country.
Yeah.
And I think, what on earth have things come to from the world we thought we were living in?
That's right. I mean, look, I could argue with you all day about what you said about Russia. I mean, I believe Vladimir Putin is a gangster. However, I'm going to qualify that by saying on the big issues of the day, Russia is on the right side of justice. It's on the right side in Syria, undoubtedly. And what it's done in Syria to stop Western imperialism and Western backing of jihadists, Russia's been absolutely right. And I don't believe any of this Skripal nonsense. I believe there is a demonized Russia agenda, which we're seeing playing out on a daily basis through the UK media. But as far as intelligence agencies go, I believe they're all as bad as one another. Mossad, the Russian ones, the French and the UK ones, they're all a pack of liars and murderers. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. But on this issue, I think the Russians are on the right side of history. And I think what the work you've done looking into this is been forensic, Nick. It's very good. I really appreciate that. Don't leave it so long before you come back, by the way. You're welcome back.
Well, great talking to you again, Richie.
Always a pleasure. And I have to endorse again Nick's work on the 7th of July bombings in London. It's peerless. It's terrifically, it's absolutely clinical and forensic. And if you haven't read it, go to terroronthetube.co.uk. Come back anytime, Nick. Great to have you, mate.
Okay, cheers. All the best, Richie.
Speak soon. Bye for now. Great stuff, that. And it seems, by the way, that most of you have come down on Nick's side. Most of the tweets have said to me that you think the pictures are not of the same woman, that it's two different Yulias. So I have to be fair there. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, she looks kind of like the same woman to me, but I don't know is the absolute truth on that one. I was due to have two guests today. I was due to pre-record my old friend Max Egan this morning, but it didn't materialise. I'm hoping to do that because of the time difference in the next day or so, because there's a lot going on that interests Max, and we'd like to have him back on the programme. So I'll do that. Dr. Catherine Horton is going to be on the programme tomorrow. We first spoke to her. Well, she broke her own story exclusively on this programme a couple of years ago. We're talking about MK Ultra and targeting people using sophisticated weaponry. Really interesting lady, Oxford trained PhD. Catherine's going to be back on with me tomorrow. So it's a slightly shorter Richie Allen show today, 90 minutes instead of 2 hours. Don't hold it against me. We will be back to the full 2 hour show tomorrow. Great to have Nick Kollerstrom on. Very interesting to hear him. Very interesting thoughts on the Skripal story, and I've tweeted out a link to it. All right. So there you are. Right, that's it for Monday's programme then. Look after yourselves and one another. We'll do it all again tomorrow. Full 2 hour show, 5 to 7. You'll forgive me for the 90 minutes today because you've got no choice. You've got no choice, I tell you. Back tomorrow at 5. Thanks for listening to Monday's programme. It'll be online soon. Yeah. Gonna leave you with the Mavericks and back in your arms again. See you tomorrow.